Hi there, everybody. Welcome to this week's Careering Ahead. I'm Naomi Mellor, a vet for the BHA and one of the committee members of Women in Racing. And I'm absolutely delighted that my guest this evening on Careering Ahead is Julie Harrington. We've been running this series since about last autumn, actually, in order to give our members something to be going along with while COVID was in full swing. We have had a wonderful series of guests and we have got more to come. So all the previous interviews, which include Anne-Marie Phelps, who's the chair of the BHA, Salika Varma, the clerk of the course at Aintree, there's heaps and heaps of them all on the Women in Racing website. If you just go to the resources section, you'll find a little bit that says interview series, and all of the previous interviews are available there. So we are open this evening. The Q&A is open. If you have any questions for Julie, I will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat box. So if you'd like to ask any questions, do pop them in. We would love to hear what your burning questions for Julie are. I'm sure there's going to be plenty. And yeah, we're really looking forward to chatting tonight. Next week, just in advance, I will be talking to Amy Swales from York Racecourse in advance of the Dante Festival. And we're really excited about that. And Amy is going to be coming on to talk to us about her career. And yeah, that will be Wednesday, the 5th of May. We'll be sending out an email with a reminder for that. So do pop that in your diaries as well. The Women in Racing AGM is also coming up in May. And we have got a race at Ascot coming up too, which is very exciting. We were planning on holding our AGM at Ascot, but COVID has put a bit of a kibosh on that one. But we're hoping really to see you all later in the year at some live events, and we will keep you posted on that. But my guest today, Julie, needs very little introduction. I think there'll be quite a lot of people logging into this call to see what she has to say. Julie is the CEO of the BHA. She has come to horse racing from British Cycling, where she was the CEO for a few years. But she does have a long and illustrious history in the racing industry, having started with Northern Racing and Uttoxeter Racecourse. Before that was ARC, and I'm sure we're going to dig into that today. So she has come back to her home. We're very delighted to have her, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her here on Careering Ahead to chat to us about her career and everything that she has got going on in the industry. So Julie, I was going to kick off. I saw that you had said in an interview that you had no idea what you wanted to do when you were young. But what was do you want to tell us a little bit about your early life and what you were into as a kid and what your aspirations and ambitions were?
Lovely to be here, Naomi. And I've got to say that my first ever career aspiration was to be a vet. So you're living my dream. So yeah,
it's a common one, Julie. I'm not going to lie. We're living everyone's dream as vets.
Yeah. I mean, that was when I was, a real little girl. But yeah, I'm from North Manchester originally, sort of quite an urban area, working class family. Both my mum and dad worked. My dad's an engineer. My mum had a fish and chip shop, which was exciting. If ever any of you are up north, my sister now runs the chippy. But yes, I was set to work from an early age as well, sort of washing pans in the back of the chippy. But yeah, sort of myself and an older sister spent a lot of time with my dad, who is absolutely sport mad. And I'm from the grandstand era, where there were only 3 channels on telly, and grandstand showed every sport. And if you were in any way interested in sport, you got an indoctrination into racing, rugby league. You would basically see everything from snooker to high jumping in the same afternoon. It was all very exciting. But yeah, sport mad. And that's about it, really.
Yeah, amazing. And so you had yours also very early, and you've talked a lot about in interviews before about having a good support network around you. Were you a kind of sporty, happy family when you were growing up, and how did you kind of manage once you'd had your daughter Julie in terms of transitioning on with your education from there?
So yeah, I had my daughter actually when I was in 5th year, and I don't know what that is now in new school years. But I was 15 when I had her. She was an unknown pregnancy, so very, very dramatic. I went in for my appendix out and came out with a baby. And
wow,
probably not a lot of people on the call know. But you know, we weren't a happy sporty family, because I was absolutely awful at all sports. And I think one of the reasons I work in sport as you know, on the administrative side, is I would love to be a participant, but I'm just rubbish at everything. So having her so young didn't interfere with a great sporting career, I must say.
I have seen an image of you cycling with Chris Hoy, however, so
yeah,
that'll make lots of people jealous.
And I think my thighs matched his in circumference as well on that shot as well, but unfortunately I wasn't as fast. Yeah, I had her really young, but clearly I had a lot of help from my parents to enable me to continue my education and go on to A levels and then to university. But there are upsides in having a child so young, in that you've got a lot of energy.
My fucking Wi-Fi has just
not as knackered all the time. I do look at people who've sort of had children later on in the career, and I just look at them in awe, just because it must be so tiring.
Yeah, definitely. So you went to do a bachelor's in education with a view to becoming a teacher, and I have heard you say that you were thinking about being an art teacher. What was it that turned you off from being a teacher, I guess, and how did you find your training? Did you enjoy all of that, Julie?
So I think the thing that turned me off, and like so many things, I think teaching is a genuine vocation.
Yeah.
And in honesty, I chose it because it'd have the same school holidays as my daughter. And it was only in the third year of the degree, where you do teacher practice, that you realise it is a vocation, because you're let loose on other people's children, and you realise that actually you don't maybe like other people's children as much as your own. And it was a big call to you know, at that age I'd been aiming at it because it would have given me that sort of ability to have the same holidays. I was a single mom at the time, and the art, it was to be an art teacher, and I decided against it, and I would say ran away and joined an advertising agency. So on the creative side, to initially using the art, but eventually moved over into the client handling side.
I think there'll be a lot of people who've had to homeschool over the last year who will realise that teaching is very much a vocation. It's definitely, I think it's an awful lot of people in this country with a newfound respect for teachers, in, you know, following the circumstances of the pandemic. But you said about being on the creative side. Have you always been quite a creative person? Like, do you really enjoy that side of things, and do you have a flair for kind of creative arts and things?
Yeah, absolutely, and loved that side. However, I also like being around people, and so I was drawn to that sort of client handling side, and probably one of the first things, you know, from a career point of view, deciding to carry on my education in the evenings, and do my marketing qualifications, was probably a really decisive moment for me, that because it's that, right, I've got a young child, I've got a full-time job, but if I really want to progress, I'm going to need to sort of continue to educate myself and build my qualifications. And I did my Chartered Institute of Marketing, which I think, you know, for people who are quite creative and enjoy finding solutions for customers, it was just really exciting, but probably looking back, one of the toughest periods of time, where you're trying to juggle earning money, carrying on with your education, being a mum, and yeah, that was a tough few years, but probably laid the foundations for a lot of my further roles.
Definitely. And I think anyone who's done study around a full-time job, and particularly, like you say, going to night school, my husband did a master's when he was working full-time a couple of years ago, and it's blooming hard work, isn't it? But particularly when you've got a young daughter as well. And within that advertising and marketing role, one of the kind of key accounts that you ended up with was Bass, that took you into the brewing industry. Do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of getting into the breweries, and that subsequently led you to Carlsberg Tetley, which became a big part of your career, Julie? What was it that you enjoyed so much about that aspect of work and that industry when you started there?
I mean, it is a really sort of, pubs and brewing is a very social industry, as you'd expect. Lots of interaction with people, but the sort of main principles of marketing around understanding your customer, giving them a product that they want to buy at the price they want to buy it. It was a brilliant grounding for all of the sort of textbook marketing, brand development. And I was involved at a time of real change within the brewing industry, where there was a lot of consolidation within the marketplace. There was a huge shift from pubs being just a vehicle where breweries could sell their product, to actually pubs being brands, to more, so I'm talking early 90s, so there weren't a lot of family and female-led pubs then. You know, if you went in to get a glass of wine, it would probably be from, you know, a box of wine under the counter with a pump, so it was a time of immense change within the market, and it just felt a really vibrant and interesting time to be around it, and it was great fun. You know, it was really sociable.
And that was presumably quite a man's world in the early 90s. You know, you sort of think back of, like you say, before pubs became family orientated and a bit more welcoming to people who wanted to drink something other than beer. Was the industry very male at that time, Julia? And if so, how did you kind of slot into that as a woman early on in your career?
It was incredibly male dominated. And I remember when the first brewery I worked at was Thwaites Brewery in Blackburn in Lancashire, and I was the first woman to ever have a company car. When I collected it, they'd strapped a mattress to the front of it. Which, I have to say, I did live up to the stereotype, and I think I had every single panel of the car I destroyed within about 2 years. But it was having been to one of the things I skipped actually when I was talking about my sort of younger life, is at my school. It was an all boys grammar school.
Right.
And in the years where grammar schools were changed into comps, and this school, it was called St Peter's in North Manchester, we were the first year of girls, and at the time I didn't really think of it at all, but I think moving from education to then into, you know, my next few jobs after that were very male dominated. I think the fact that you'd have sort of 4 or 5 years of boys above you at school just sort of had got used to it. And you know, you look back now as an older woman and go, a lot of the coping mechanisms were about being part of the gang, and probably joining in with banter that I wasn't particularly comfortable with, to fit. All the stuff that now, if I was advising a younger woman, I would say, you know, you've got to be yourself. I probably broke every one of my own rules in those sort of early few years in the brewing industry. But I also know that all my bosses were guys, and they were all brilliant, and many remained sort of mentors to me in the years that followed. And every one of them promoted me, and, you know, didn't hold back my career. So it is a time that I sort of look back and cringe a little bit, at probably how I changed my own behaviour to fit in. But I also had incredible career progression during that period of time.
Do you know, it's so funny, Julie, because I've actually written down an exact question about, you know, we're often told to just be yourself, and that is advice that we give. But I was going to ask you if you'd felt that you'd had to change your personality at work, which clearly you did. And actually, it's a very fine line to walk, that of staying on the right side of what is acceptable within your own realms with regard to kind of banter. We talk about banter in the workplace a lot, and levels of unacceptable or intolerable banter, but also needing to fit in, to be social in order to progress in work. And I was just wondering, do you think your lines have changed now, or do you feel that society has changed with regard to that? What's your kind of views on kind of walking that line, I guess, as a woman in a male dominated workplace?
I do think society has changed massively for the better. And I think the fact that I was a sports fan, and I'd been brought up in a household where everybody knew, it was before the Premier League, but everybody knew the sort of League One division placings, everybody knew the scores from the weekend. So I wasn't going in, and I worked in Leeds for a while, and I always knew the Leeds United, because everybody who worked in Leeds was Leeds United fanatics. But I sort of knew that. But for some young women starting out who didn't, it was more uncomfortable. And so I think I'm always a real, I was going to say real fan, but I always think I've been a pretty good judge of intent. And I am really comfortable in an environment where somebody makes a mistake and they might slightly get you back up, but the intent is good. But there have been times in my career where I have felt that the intent has been wrong. And I've probably encountered that more with race than gender. That my daughter is mixed race, so her dad was black, she's half Afro-Caribbean, and what I found in the early stages of my career was, and I do think society has moved on a lot since then, is because there would be a room of all white people, I was more tolerant of anything around gender, because I might be the only sort of white woman in a room of 12 white guys. But I would massively notice the stuff on race, because there was a room full of white people, they would feel more comfortable saying something that I really would have a sort of red line on, and I would be braver speaking up in those areas, probably out of a sort of protective instinct, than I was on sort of matters of gender at that point.
And have you always been kind of quite forthright about calling out things that you didn't agree with, and brave enough to do that in a work setting as well? Because I think that's something that often people struggle with, even if they feel uncomfortable actually calling out that behavior, whether that's sexist or racist or anything else, is sometimes can be quite difficult for people. And I think particularly young women in the workplace, if you're feeling a little bit intimidated, having the courage to do that and sticking your head above the parapet, I guess, Julie, can be quite challenging at times.
I would the honest answer is no. I haven't always been great.
No, me neither.
But I think it is a muscle. It's like the old 10,000 hours things, or every muscle that you flex and get more comfortable with. I do almost challenge myself sometimes, that is it that as you've become more senior, you've become more confident and more comfortable calling out things, or is it that you've just done it more often, and so you've developed some techniques which aren't about embarrassing a person and are about taking somebody to one side and just respectfully correcting them, or letting them know that they upset you when you said something. And often I will frame it in, do you know, when you said that, I found that really upsetting, or you might not know this, but this is how you probably unintentionally made me feel. But it does take a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of courage, and you know, there will still be times when I let things slide because of you make a judgment call of what was the intent behind a comment.
I think you have to pick your battles as well, don't you? Sometimes, you know, there's times when you're going to do it and there's times when you're not. So you mentioned briefly in passing there about mentors and climbing, you know, helping you to progress in the brewing industry. And I know you said John McEwen was a big mentor for you, and then Sir Stanley Clarke when you moved to Northern Racing after that. How did you come across those people in your career, and have you actively tried to kind of develop mentors for yourself, Julie, or did that just happen quite organically with time?
I think it happened quite organically with time. And Sir Stan, I wouldn't say was a mentor, to be honest. I would say he was an inspiration.
Oh, that's
lovely. He wasn't somebody I could pick up the phone to and ask for advice.
Yeah.
But, you know, in every job, you sort of collect relationships with people that you can later on call for help and advice later in your career. And different people are great at different things. And so, for example, you know, it's 10 years or more since Lord Howard, so Michael Howard, ex-leader of the Conservative Party, was my chair when I was at Northern Racing. But when I started this role, I could pick up the phone to him to say, can I have an hour of your time to pick your brains about how to land messages around the cabinet table, for example, or how to manage some certain, because he's been there. So it's fostering those relationships, and I think most people really want to help you. Part of it is, and if I could go back and speak to my younger self, there's probably been lots of sleepless nights, and you know, where you're struggling with a problem, that if you'd have shared that problem and just picked up the phone and said, just can I kick something around with you sooner, I'd have probably got quite a lot more sleep.
Definitely. So while you were at Carlsberg and in the brewing industry, that was when your kind of passion for racing really kicked off, and then you obviously transitioned into working in racing at that point. Can you just tell us a little bit about what it was that sparked that interest, Julie, and how you decided to step out of the brewing industry and into sports?
So I would say before my professional life, when I was doing A-levels, one of my big mates at college, his dad was a pitch bookmaker.
Oh, cool. So, right.
The Walmsley brothers, I don't know whether anybody's placed a bet with the Walmsley brothers, but they, you know, when I talk about trying to manage education and part-time jobs, I used to do a load of summer work for them, that they had pitches at Chester and York, and Bellevue Dogs, which was a bit less glamorous.
So you're basically a pro already.
And so in terms of my sort of, we weren't from a racing family.
Okay.
And so I was never taken to the races by my mum and dad. I think part of that was financial, part of that was it just wasn't part of their sort of suite of leisure activities. So my first days going racing were working with the Walmsley brothers. And I had an absolute ball. But then when I was in Carlsberg, a lot of the business was done on the golf course. I don't play golf. It was part of that being one of the only women. If you were selling beer in that sort of free trade environment, it was invite your customers out for a golf day. And it'll be brilliant. So I'll just be sat in the clubhouse while I'm waiting for you to come back. And so I put in alternative proposals, one based on the fact that not all of our customers were blokes. Most of them were, admittedly, at that time. But having been at the races, working, through the summer, I just knew that these were great places to go. John McEwen was a chief executive of Carlsberg Tetley in Burton at the time, big racing fan, so preaching to the converted really. And gradually over a period of time, most of our corporate hospitality spend moved from quite male dominated, exclusive environments to a lot of money spent on racecourses. So you talked about somebody from York being on next week. Spent quite a lot of money at York over those years, but they were brilliant for a number of reasons. One, everybody who works in a racecourse environment knows this is part of the sales pitch, but it's true that you actually have more quality time with your customer than you would going to a football game or a rugby game. And certainly in those early days, it was far more gender neutral. And it was just a better environment to do business in. And so, a lot of the sales and corporate hospitality activity was done at racecourses up and down the land. And it was great fun, but also we did great business as well.
It's funny, that thing about business being done on the golf course, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot of men who don't realise what a barrier that is to not just women that don't play golf, but men who don't play golf as well. And actually it's kind of, you realise there's so many kind of power deals being made on the flipping golf course. It's like, well, I hate golf, And
you know what, we were talking earlier about how you flex your behaviour. I took golf lessons.
Oh my God.
I'm embarrassed to say. I did a course of 10 golf lessons in an effort to comply. And as I mentioned earlier, I still have yet to find the sport that I excel in, apart from beer mat flipping, which I'm quite good at.
Well, me too.
But yes, after a course of 10 lessons, the pro at the golf club could have probably charged me through the nose to go and do another 10 lessons, but he had a quiet word and said it probably wasn't my game.
Well, there you go. I do believe Winston Churchill was right when he said that golf is just a way to ruin a good walk. So off you were recruited by the lovely Rod Street, who is just an absolute diamond of a person, to go and work in racing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your first roles in racing and your progression within what was Northern Racing at that time?
Yeah, so I'd been in the brewing industry for some time, and I actually moved to British Airways first. That it was that consumer marketing, taking your consumer product, branding it, selling it to as many people as possible. And I went to, because it is it's still getting people to part with the leisure pound. I went to British Airways. And that was probably, a career low light for me, because I quite quickly realised that it just wasn't the right fit, cultural fit. It was a great job and I loved the job, but it just wasn't the right cultural fit for me. I really felt like a number. So I think there were 40,000 employees at British Airways at that time or something. Wow. And quite quickly, within the first year, I was like, I think I made a mistake here. And so started flicking through the back of Marketing Week. It was before jobs were on websites. Flicking through the back of Marketing Week. And Rod, ahead of his time, I think, it was advertising for a racecourse manager in the back of Marketing Week because he wanted somebody with marketing skills.
There's no flies on Rod, are there?
And we talked about Sir Stanley Clarke being an inspiration because he was part of the interview panel, but I would definitely put Rod as a mentor, because even when we weren't working together in the years that followed, he was one of those people that you could pick up the phone to just go, come on, just kick something around with you. So yeah, I must admit, and Rod might even remember, that my application letter was so sort of, I just knew that I didn't really have the experience of running a race course. So my application letter was very sort of short and a little bit sort of, I don't know anything about running a race course, but, you know, I've got experience of turning some quite male dominated pubs in decline into being family and female friendly and so on. And I got an interview, so and ended up running Uttoxeter, which was you know, a real highlight in my career, actually, where you just feel like the level of ownership, even though you don't own the business, but you just feel like it's yours. And you know, people who are on the call who are from a racecourse environment, you do get quite sort of possessive of the site, and sort of somebody dropping a crisp bag on your racecourse. And I used to follow people around picking up litter, but yeah, I instantly felt at home there. It's a really nice country course, really welcoming, and you know, I had great fun while I was there.
Yeah, amazing. And you went on to become to be running all of the Northern race courses at that time. Did you foresee yourself at that point staying in racing for a long time, or did you always kind of hanker to try other sporting environments? Because you obviously went to the FA after that, and you were in Burton-on-Trent, and then went to work at the opening of St George's Park before the London Olympics, and amazing opportunity there. What was when you were working in racing the first time around, what were your sort of thoughts about your future at that point, I guess, Julie?
Yeah, I really didn't think I would leave. And the whole moving to the FA was one of, you know, it was a bit of an accident, really.
Yeah.
It was, we were talking to the FA about potentially running St George's Park for them as
Oh, right.
as because it is a consumer leisure site with a lot of turf management, so an agronomy, and you know, you are trying to give a great customer experience on a site that sport is happening. So it's great experience for the participants, providing a great playing surface rather than racing surface. So it was a very early stage discussion when St George's Park was just a hole in the ground. And I came away from that meeting going, oh my God, I want to be part of this. So it was just one of those accidents, but I didn't go with any idea of leaving racing at that point. Although I think, you know, I had been at Northern Racing when it was family owned. I was involved through the sale of the business to the Rubens. The Rubens had built up their shareholding in Arena at that point as well, and there was talk of a merger. So I think it was probably the right time for me to go at that point anyway.
Yeah. And what was happening for those people who don't know, what was happening at St George's Park in those early days? And can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with women's football as well, Julie, as time went on?
Yeah, so St George's Park it was pretty much a hole in the ground in those days, but it was the creation of the National Football Centre. So it's a centre of excellence for football coaches to come and coach, train to be better coaches. So the long-term vision being that more better coaches would lead to more better players in the future. And it was also a place to bring all 23, it was at the time, of the England teams together to give them all the same experience, because the women's game was very much seen as an inferior game. And so you would have, like, the men's senior team would be training in a 5-star hotel with beautiful pitches attached, and the women were expected to get changed in a car park and play on a dodgy pitch around the back, sort of thing. And it was an opportunity to bring all the different age groups, both men and women's game, and the disability squads as well. So at that time, I think there were about 4 different squads with different impairments in the different categories accepted by UEFA and FIFA, and give everybody that same aspirational experience of what it's like to play for and represent your country, to really sort of have that in your DNA. And I think, you know, what I've brought back with me and is how sportsmen and women across horse racing, how do we make sure that we are giving them that same professional treatment? And I think we've got quite a long way to go there, but you know, clearly a lot more funding flowing through football. And it was, I think it was 130 million pounds to finish the build at St George's Park. But great fun starting a team from scratch, and developing everything from the very beginning, where you can actually think from a cultural point of view, talk about how do we want it to be, how do we want it feel to work here, what do we want our values to be, instead of, you know, working in an organisation that has been up and running for many years, which had been my experience up to that point.
Yeah, and actually amazing to have that opportunity, because even when you're kind of partly working for the you know, you're under the auspices of the FA, I guess, but actually it's, you know, it is rare in big sports and in governing bodies and working in sports governance that you actually do get that opportunity to be a kind of quote unquote startup, I suppose, Julie, and you know, amazing opportunity to have that. I was just going to ask you as well, football is kind of renowned for having multiple stakeholder challenges, I think is a phrase you hear a little bit. Obviously, without going into anything, racing has multiple stakeholders. How do you go about, and how have you gone about in your career, achieving consensus in the sports that you've worked in, where there are a lot of different plates spinning, I guess, Julie, and a lot of different people involved in various ways?
Look, I think the first time I was in racing, I looked upon racing as unique and thought, oh my God, we're like this crazy dysfunctional family, and that it was just racing. And I think moving to a couple of different sports has really helped me see that it's just sport. You need to embrace the mess a little bit, that people are passionate about sport. And probably disproportionately passionate. People also make their living in sport, and so people are passionate because it is their livelihoods, and I love the passion that comes with different stakeholder groups, and I think getting comfortable that the stakeholder landscape in sport is a bit messy. It is something that over sort of the 10 years that I've been away, you just go, right, yes, racing is different, but every sport is unique. But there are a lot of commonalities in terms of multiple stakeholders, lots of different agendas, lots of people trying to make a living, and pulling against each other. I think one of the things that I am, how do I phrase this? I just think in racing, on my return, I think that maybe the way that we speak to each other is probably just not as nice as it might be. That I think having stakeholder differences across other sports is completely normal, but I do think that there is a real place and a real need for speaking to each other with a bit of respect and understanding that we've all got different agendas and that we can work together. And everybody says that the way that we've pulled together during you know, an incredibly difficult year and a half nearly for the sport has been fantastic. But I just hope we can keep some of that camaraderie and just respect one another's different agendas, and try and speak to each other in with a bit of respect in terms of how we navigate a way through as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's a challenge, isn't it? But I think actually at the end of the day, everybody has, like you say, pulled together so brilliantly during the last 12, 15 months, wherever we're up to. Time is a weird concept these days. But yeah, it would be brilliant actually to look to the future of a place where everybody is driving towards the same end goal, because I think what everybody wants is a healthy, thriving racing industry, actually, isn't it? And
you don't want to lose the passion, do you? You don't want to lose the fact that people are incredibly passionate about the sport, and that's what makes it such an exciting, and lots of people are drawn to work in racing because it is part vocation, and racing doesn't happen Monday to Friday 9 to 5, so I don't think people would put in the hours that they do if it wasn't part vocation, as well as being really important for people's livelihoods and the economy and all the good stuff we know about.
Yeah, definitely. So after progressing in the FA, you went up to being group operations director for them before going to British Cycling for your first CEO role, first of many, I'm sure. It was a big job at Cycling. I think it's probably not an unfair thing to say that Cycling was going through a bit of a time of reputational challenge. How were you daunted by that, Julie, and how did you kind of face knowing that it was going to be a bit of an uphill climb with Cycling in terms of repairing some of the things that happened before your tenure?
That meant as a pun, Naomi.
Yeah, you're going on the Tour de France, Julie.
But I think football probably prepared me for that quite well. That a lot of controversies break out of the sports pages and into the front pages, as you know, probably more so than racing. And it was probably where I had my first experience of the how toxic social media can be when I was at the FA. So people won't really find me on social media, but I remember doing something similar to this actually at the FA for International Women's Day, where at the time I was the most senior woman at the FA. I was on the, there were 8 or 9 directors, and I was the only female. Quite quickly joined by Kelly Simmons, who was amazing. But we did this sort of thing for International Women's Day of Ask Julie, which was all about that sort of breaking into careers in football. And some of the stuff that came through on the social media feed was, Julie, as the most senior female at the FA, do you find the ironing or the washing up more challenging? All sorts of horrendous stuff. But I think my time at the FA prepared me for some of the reputational challenges that cycling was facing. But I think probably in the golden thread that runs through a lot of my career is that I actually really do like change, and I'm not frightened by it, and I do think organisations need to change and adapt, and so it was probably more of an attraction to me than if it had been, do you just want to take over the keys of the velodrome and everything's fine, we're just in steady state. If you could just keep things ticking over, that would be great. That probably wouldn't have been the job for me. So the fact that that there were some serious issues, masked by a huge amount of success on the world stage, were part of the attraction, if I'm honest.
Definitely. You're a woman who likes a challenge, Julie, aren't you? So you were the first female CEO at cycling, and you're the first female CEO at racing. What advice would you give to kind of aspiring young female CEOs? What would you kind of tell people who look to that position and see it as a little bit unattainable, perhaps, because those are really big jobs, Julie, that they don't come around awfully often. They're very competitive. What do you say to people who kind of think, oh, I wonder if I could do that myself?
One is that the person who cares most about your career development is you. And a lot of particularly young women that I've spoken with are sort of waiting to be developed and for somebody to tell them what is it I need to do next to get my next big job? And I had a little bit of career coaching earlier on in my career, and I remembered my first session and thinking, wow, that's a complete swizz, because they made me do all the thinking, where you know, they were just asking me lots of questions around, and what is it in your armory, you know, what is it in your suite of skills that you think other CEOs have got that you've not got? And I'd be like, oh, well, I'm not an accountant, and a lot of CEOs are accountants, so maybe I need to do some more work on finance. So it was all in my head. And so I think nobody cares as much about your career as you do. So if there is a role that you think that is really what I want to do, break it down, look at your own transferable skills, look at the bits of the jigsaw that you think you might be missing. Can you recruit for those and say, well, actually, I'm not an accountant, but I can recruit an accountant? Or is it actually something that is more about more behavioural, and you actually need to build your sort of board meeting skills, or presentation, or building your sort of confidence in influencing, and they are the sorts of things that you can kick around with mentors that you and trusted friends, but often just your mates as well.
Yeah.
You know, I've had some of my best career chats with one of my best mates who, you know, after a couple of glasses of wine, we put the world to rights.
All the best conversations happen after a couple of glasses of wine, Julie. And you know, it's obviously been a very challenging year since you started, and for the racing industry in general. How are you feeling about the next kind of upcoming 12 months? What are you looking forward to? What are the challenges that you foresee ahead, Julie? Obviously, coming out of COVID is, you know, we're all really grateful that we're starting to open up a little bit more, but it has been exceptionally challenging, not only start to your tenure, but for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be open and say that, yes, it was a challenging start at British Cycling, first CEO role, lots of reputational challenges, but I probably found this role tougher, just because I've had the first 4 months in a new job, and I can't meet the team. And we are a people business. We're not selling widgets. We are doing things for and through our people, and people do things. Yes, they do things for their job, and because they have to. But people are motivated by having a common purpose, and being inspired by the task that they're trying to do, and the team that they're trying to do that in. And it's just so, I found it really difficult as a bit of a sort of you know, somebody who enjoys human company. I'm quite a social animal, so I've probably found this a really challenging period of time, because you come into a job that has got a massive to-do list. Oh, and by the way, you can't see anybody. So this complex stakeholder landscape, you can't actually meet, and you know, because often having I don't mean challenging conversations in a confrontational sense. I mean challenging conversations because the subject matter is about, you know, big important subjects. They're so much better done face to face than, you know, I know we've not met before, but let's get straight into it in Zoom. And there is no sort of preamble in Zoom either, is there? There's no sort of should we have lunch and have a cup of tea before we get into the sort of nitty gritty.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to say that I found working virtually as a new CEO, it was different in my last role, because I'd got to know everybody for 3 years before we went into lockdown. And so you can sort of judge people's body language a bit more because you know them. So what I'm really looking forward to is just getting to see people more, and having customers back on race courses, and actually being able to say, shall we meet, and shall we meet on course, so we can talk business, and the same way as I used to do when I was buying the hospitality space to do business at a racecourse for another company. Racecourses are a great place to actually talk business, because you've got half an hour between races and then you can actually watch a race.
Definitely. And you received an honorary doctorate. Just finally, just if anyone's got questions, you pop them in the box, because we are going to have a few minutes for questions left, but we're winding down. You did get an honorary doctorate from the University of Staffordshire, Julie, which is amazing, for your contributions to sport and everything that you've done, as well as the grassroots and with women in sport. Obviously, in the racing industry, we're one of the very few sports where women are competing against men at equal levels, equal prize money. What's your kind of take on, having been in cycling and obviously in football before that, what's your kind of take on where we are in racing with regard to gender equality and women within the industry as a whole compared to other sports, do you think?
I think the competing on a level playing field is something that we've talked about for a long time, but I do think we've got quite a way to go still, in terms of, attracting and developing talent, both on the field of play and off it, but particularly, female jockeys facilities, all those things that we do have quite a way to go. But I also think in the 10 years that I've been away, there's been huge progress. And huge progress, I think, particularly in women across senior positions, and a huge amount of that I'm sure is down to women in racing. But I've definitely seen the difference going away, coming back 10 years later. But I still think having that representation at the senior level of the sport from a participant point of view, we've still got a way to go.
As somebody who has to use the lady jockey facilities, I can agree with you that they are not always up to scratch, and they definitely do need a little bit more development over time. But like with everything, it's a work in progress, isn't it? And just finally, where are you heading out soon? Are you hoping to get on courses soon? Have you been out to a race course yet, Julie? Like, what are you planning for the summer with regard to getting out and about, if you can?
I have been out on course, but clearly cautiously, because we're telling at that point owners that they couldn't get on course, and if I was swanning around, it wouldn't really be setting the right tone. But I have been out because I thought it was really important for me to see the COVID facilities in action. I've been talking to government about our response to it. I'm talking to the levy board. Clearly working really closely with David and the team at the RCA in terms of the protocols that are in place at race courses in the future. So it's been important for me to go and see them. So I've been to Doncaster, I've been to Cheltenham, and I've been to Aintree. But it is really nice to meet some of the BHA team, but really great to also meet some of our participants and be able to see them on course. But as the restrictions lift and we can welcome more and more people on course, I think my sort of working week will be, yes, a couple of days in the office, but getting out and about, not just to race courses, but also getting to yards, training centres, and meeting as many people as I can.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're very much looking forward to seeing you, and hopefully we'll be able to welcome you to one or two women in racing events in future. And I know I'll see you on course, as will a lot of other people on this call as well. But Julie, thank you so much for your time. We're really, really appreciative. This has been such an enlightening chat. If anybody watching this back has any burning questions for Julie, do pop them into us at Women in Racing, and we will pose them to her if we can. And you can.
I have got sunburn from. If anybody's watching and going, is she always that red? I think I've just got sunburn this weekend.
I know, I got sunburnt on my neck at Windsor last week. It was crazy hot. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, Julie. We've really, really appreciated this chat. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will be back next week. As I said, details will be on the email, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. And in the meantime, have an absolutely wonderful evening. And Julie, thank you again. It's much appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Naomi. Amazing there's no questions, but clearly we covered everything.
We'll see you soon. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.